Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Relentless Watchman podcast. The subject of today's podcast comes from a video that was sent to me by one of our listeners who asked me what I thought of the video. The video is on YouTube and it is titled, "Will Cops Form Marauder Gangs After SHTF? An Insider's Answer." Now, anyone not familiar with SHTF, it's what is referred to as the shit hits the fan, which is a scenario based upon the collapse of government, the removal of regular government services such as police, fire department, etc., and a situation where there is lawlessness. So I thought that might be an interesting topic and that I would give it a play. Now, in the immortal words of Charles Ramsey, as soon as I started the video, a man with a lopsided goatee, covering one side of his top lip with the other one wide open, and with the left side of the goatee indented and the other side going outward, probably a half of an inch or better outside of the left side. That was the dead giveaway for me. I was like, okay, this guy is either not a policeman or he comes from a department that has a lack of professionalism enforced, because no officer representing any department, let alone police, anyone in government should not be allowed to look the way that he did. I mean, there's a possibility that it could have been maybe furlough time for him or something of that nature, but you're making a video. I'm thinking that he thought that that was okay to do, and he looked absolutely terrible. So that was my dead giveaway. And I'm like, oh, maybe this video will still be salvageable and still have some decent content that could be useful for the public, which is what any of us in law enforcement and or security should be interested in. You know, the fact that what we do keeps people safe. So I said, okay, I'm going to look past the goatee. It's going to be hard, but I'll make every attempt to, and try to get the content out of the video. And hopefully it's decent content. Unfortunately, I was disappointed. Within maybe a minute of the video, and I like to put out a disclaimer that I respect all law enforcement from everywhere. Everybody plays an important role to the citizens whom they serve and protect. And I give a special shout out. Really, this entire shout out is to those who are actually professionals, which is possibly even a single digit percentage. Because to be a true professional, your emotionalism, your politics, your stereotypes or what have you should not dictate the way that you treat any member of the citizenry that you are supposed to be serving. I'm not going to be that guy that says, no, a majority of them do that. I know that that would be a lie, and I'm not going to be a liar. And of course, this is based upon my personal experience, which is this is something that I can comment on without giving statistics, because this is what I've seen day in and day out, working in two different departments from two different major cities on two different sides of the country. So I'm sure that I have more experience, if not in years or only in years, also in volume of work than the guy that was in this video. And not to take anything away from him, but that just needed to be said. And I came from a place where your entire look, from your uniform down to your grooming, had to be precise, clean, professional at all times, which I can't say for this guy in whatever department, if any, he's employed with. Within 1 minute of this video, he spoke about larger, more liberal cities, which means that the purpose of this video more so was not to talk about what the title said, will cops form marauder gangs, but to identify a specific group who, in his opinion, would be the group that form marauder gangs. And he began to sculpt this, his view, without support of anything factual, from the very beginning of this video. So the larger, more liberal cities are the cities which he blamed for having some of the lowest hiring standards, which, we'll get to in a moment. But, that's going to lead their personnel to joining marauder gangs in a hits the fan scenario. But to explore that comment, I personally know that the two major cities that I have policed in has some of the highest hiring standards in the entire nation. He spoke of some specific things, background, credit check, canvassing, which means going to people in your neighborhood and finding out what type of person you are, and doing a surprise visit at his home, as if that was stringent. Of course, the criminal background check is going to be something that you are going to see across the board. There are some people advocating that departments allow folks that have minor criminal records. This is something that pretty much has already been taking place. One thing that we have to take into consideration, into realization, is that the hiring standards, like most rules or laws, were made and put in place with the understanding that they can be enforced at will. So a lot of these so-called stringent hiring standards are utilized to be able to say no to certain groups of people and say yes to others. This is something that I saw personally with a situation that included a young black man who was 25 years old, who admitted during his interview that he had smoked marijuana while in the military 2 years prior to his application date. He was told that it would have to be a minimum of 3 years prior, and that he should reapply on the next application event. These events weren't yearly events. Sometimes they would go 3, 4, 5 years without hiring. Needless to say, he lost interest after that time and never reapplied. Now, had he not said anything and had been tested, his body would have tested negative to drugs, because if I'm not mistaken, they were doing the hair test at that time, which people usually give about 6 months that they can go back in time to find out whether or not that person has done any drugs. He would have been perfectly fine, but he chose to tell the truth, which is evidence of integrity, which I believe should be taken into an account holistically in a person's application process. This is something that you have no ability to find out. and this person is forthright and honest with you, why would you deny a person with that type of integrity? Okay, that is a separate question. After getting on the job, I met a young man who had 2 DUIs, who was white and had gotten on the job. And I'm wondering, 2 DUIs? And he went deeper to tell me that in one, he actually had a small physical confrontation with the police officers who arrested him. And I'm like, you made it? How does this happen? But like I said before, the rules are for those in charge to be able to pick and choose as they please. And you will find that in your hiring standards throughout the country. People in those units that are responsible for pushing people through and into the academy and out to the streets are privy to a lot of information for those that are coming behind them from their own neighborhoods. And the foolishness that a lot of those young men and women have entertained themselves with over the course of their lives, a lot of those would make them questionable at best as police recruits, but they still make it onto the job. I've heard of application packets or recruit packets being modified. Okay, well, we're not going to put that on there because it doesn't come up in the search, or what have you. Or, this stuff is sealed, so we don't even have to mention it. A lot of them are coached through the process of applying because they have a connection. Their uncle is CPD or LAPD or New York Police Department, and he's well respected in the department. He lets them know beforehand. A phone call is made. Look out for this guy when he comes in. Okay, well, we're going to help you clean up your application before it's processed to assure that you won't have any bumps and bruises during this process. It happens more often than a lot of us know. I met guys who, even after being on the job, talked about how crazy their weekend was. One in particular was a probationary police officer, which was the 18 months, including 6 months of the academy and 1 year on the street before you're a full-fledged police officer with all the rights and privileges and protections of the organization that represents and protects police officers. This gentleman was probably in his 3rd week out of the academy, went downtown, got filthy drunk, got into an argument with a guy over a parking space, pulled his gun on the guy when the guy confronted him, and chased the guy down the street, stumbling and falling, even dropping his gun on several occasions. He was what we call on-viewed, which means they were on the scene and they observed him with their own eyes by 2 more senior police officers who weren't probationary and who were on duty at the time. They ordered him to drop the gun, took him into custody, found out he was a PPO. They take him to the station. This should have been a process where a street deputy was called in. He should have been DUI'd. Any witnesses, including the guy that he was chasing, should have been brought in and given, had a statement taken from them. And the process of firing him should have begun on that evening. What happened instead was that this young white officer was taken to see a watch commander who was an older white officer, who brought him into his office and gave him a stern talking to. Afterwards, took him to the lockup in the district, had the lockup keeper put him in an open cell and made him sleep the night there as a punishment and to sober him up and have him prepared to go home the next day. He woke up, I'm sure, probably not realizing everything that had happened, was explained the situation, warned to never do it again, and sent home without nary a notification. These are the things that occur, and I'm glad that I watched this because it brought a lot of these things to memories. These are the things that occur in these major, so-called major police departments that have some of the most stringent background investigations processes, hiring processes in the entire country. They'll find a way around them in order to get the personnel who many times are of the fairest or the lightest complexion onto these departments. Now, moving on along in response to the video, the man in the video also talked about, he used what I call the code word, which is diversity. And I think he said more diversified departments. He said that was the reason for the lowered standards. He provided no evidence or information of any major city departments who had lowered standards to begin with, in order to get these more diversified candidates. Now, from my personal experience, the black candidates, and I'm emphasis on black, not normally I might use a term to include all people of color, but this is black candidates only, are subject to every rule, every dot, every crossing of the T has to line up perfectly. There can be nothing off at all, or they will be denied. And I saw this with the 2-year-old weed case. It wasn't a case. The fact that he had used it and had been forthright in it, that was an example that I know personally. I can possibly even bring this man on a show later on. I'm sure I still can find somebody that knows how to get in contact with him and have him tell you exactly what I told you, just in more detail. A very good guy, would have made an awesome police officer. I would have loved to have mentored him myself. And we lose a lot of these quality candidates because of the fact that the process is not a fair one. Okay, now, and looking at the fact that it's unfair, this is something that is known by people. This is something that your racist folks will deny. This is something that black officers in anonymity will readily admit to, because I am not the only person with stories like this. I told you one, but I have several. And it's not just police departments. We look at the fire department in Chicago. They discriminated against personnel like back in 1995. They used something to not hire black individuals who were qualified. Those black individuals sued and did not get their jobs until 10 years later. Of course, the city had to pay for that time that they missed, and I believe they may have had to give them the seniority that they should have had as well, which of course is something that's going to be tacked on to the taxpayer's bill. A great example to show you how them allowing these people to perpetuate these racist practices costs people money. Hire the qualified people. And this is not just a strike at this video, which was complete garbage, but this is also a strike at these departments in these cities that allow this stuff to go on. It's things that have been going on for centuries, not decades, centuries, several hundred years in these major cities, in other places. Because trust me, a small town isn't the epicenter of any type of ultra morality at all. You see more stories coming out of the small towns, and respect to the officers there that are doing their job the way it's supposed to be done. And without the malice, without the hate, without the racist skinhead, bad goatee looks and things of that nature. Great shout out to them, but you see more corruption in the smaller departments throughout these small towns, and we'll get to that in a moment, throughout the country than you do anywhere else. You have large departments, let's say like Chicago, who probably has between 12 and 14,000 members. New York, which probably has between 34 and 37,000 members. In LA, that probably has between 9,500 and 10,500. These are very large departments, yet you see cases here and there of people doing things that are outside the color of law. Now, the racist practices are going to be more rampant than you will see the criminal practices. Maybe we need to consider the racist practices criminal acts. That would be wonderful. I'd be all for it. Because there's a degree of criminality within the heart of that man or woman who's able to treat a person in a less than ethical manner due to the fact that they belong to a particular race. I would be all for that. So moving on about the video, he gives no further evidence or information about what departments have lowered their standards. He just makes a blanket statement that the big, more liberal cities are the ones that have done it. He further claims that he's met hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers, and a majority don't commit crime or use excessive force or anything of that nature. But he sees the horror stories coming from the larger cities, but he still offers absolutely no evidence of this. If you look at a lot of your excessive force cases, a lot of these cities you couldn't pronounce, or you'll be like, there's a city in this state called that? What? It's more small town issues. I mean, that's what I see on a daily. I see more small town issues coming to light. I've seen police chiefs in small towns who have been arrested for selling narcotics. Police chiefs, the leadership of the towns. There have been small towns where the court system says we can't find a member of this particular department who's actually qualified to testify, because they've all committed some type of act which makes their testimony questionable. So we cannot even prosecute these individuals because their testimony isn't solid. Like, they're not trustworthy. They've been proven. That's been proven already in a court of law. So the statement about big cities as opposed to small towns, and small towns being the places where you find integrity and truthfulness and honesty, and the big cities where you're finding the lowered standards, which leads to the pseudo gang members in waiting, who will, turn into marauders after a government collapse. It's beyond ridiculous, but I'll go further. He mentions, after saying all of this, hey, I don't want to make this political. Let me see. You started with the larger, more liberal cities, but at this point, you don't want to make it political. He also mentions that he's known some very good guys from the small towns who applied for these jobs in these larger, more liberal cities, but were denied, and instead a person who they had lowered the standards to hire were hired in that person's place. Just a clue about how some cities hire. If you're in a city like New York and you have a police hiring event, you might have 100,000 people come out to this hiring event. Usually the first part will consist of a written test. I'll use let's say Chicago for an example. A written test, I think it was 2001 maybe. Chicago hosted a written test, and it was somewhere between like 10 and 15,000 people that came out on this one particular day to take the test. I think by the test alone, about a third of that was eliminated. Now, I don't know what big city that he is referring to, but I'm almost sure that there was no way of knowing that one individual who was not selected for hire was not selected due to the fact that they lowered their standards to hire someone else, and it was due to their desire to have a more diversified. Yeah, I want to make sure I get his words correct. A diversified hire, and he also knew that this so-called diversified hire had a criminal background as well. And this it goes to show you more about the mentality of the person who created this garbage content. He obviously has an issue with diversity. He offers no proof to substantiate any of these claims that any of these departments have done anything. Had he said on, let's say, February 32nd of 2017, the city council for this particular city voted to lower hiring standards, allowing small matters of criminality in the background, as well as saying that the minimum credit score was 500, and that you could have used drugs in the last 6 months. Long as it's been at least 6 months out, you could still be hired. And there was proof that you could, tangibly get to. You can do a Google search, Yahoo search, or something of that nature. Is Yahoo still around? I'm not sure. At any rate, yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it is. I use Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports, actually. So let's say if you could do those searches and come up with that information, then you would have a basis for your content, your video content, and you could be believed because the information is tangible. But just making these blanketed statements and shouting that the reason why they're doing this is for diversified departments is just complete and utter nonsense. When I personally know that Black folks in any position, especially in law enforcement, are held to the highest of standards in the hiring process. If you look at, we'll use Chicago again for an example. I believe that probably in the teens now, maybe 19% of the entire Chicago Police Department is black. Maybe 19% of the entire police department is black. And if you get into sergeant and above, exempt rank personnel, things of that nature, it's going to dramatically decrease. You're going to get those single digits. You're going to hit those. And the city is possibly 20-something% black. Why is this? Is it because we can't find this talent, or because of the hiring standards being lowered? I would say it's the opposite. And not only is it the opposite, but that even when these same qualified black applicants get to that interviewing table, they are going to still be dismissed. Now, I'll use another thing as another example before I close this podcast out. During my psychological exam for the initial department that I joined, one of the largest in the country, and I'll leave it at that, I was asked about the discipline process. Now, a lot of people don't know, but culturally, at one time, I know things have changed drastically as of late, but at one time, receiving corporal punishment, I guess some people will call it, we called it either whippings or whoopings back in the day. If you receive those in the psychological exam, they would deem you unfit because they would say that you will have some unresolved issues as a result of receiving this discipline, what's commonly known as discipline from your parents as a child. And the reason why they did this, it wasn't because, okay, there's psychological research to support that. The reason why they did it is because that they knew that culturally it will affect a certain group of people. So there were people who would coach a proper response, more senior officers, like, you're not going to lie about it, but there's a way that you need to respond when you speak on it, to show that it was not something that would be damaging to you. So there were some things that you had to add, the conversations that went along with it, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people probably would make the decision not to mention it because they knew there was a possibility that I would not receive the job, regardless of how well balanced of a person, regardless of how well I lived, that person had lived their lives, and regardless of what successes that person had in that life, or that person's reputation within the community. None of those would mean anything just by the answering of that question. So I just want to show a deliberate pattern of excluding a certain group of people. This existed, and that's your proof of it. And you can I would ask any retired black officer from big cities if that was an issue. And I guarantee that you will find from many, if not most of them, that yes, that was an issue, and that was something that they used to disqualify black people. The other thing that I was asked is if I had fights growing up. And this question I found was also one that they wanted to use as a disqualification tactic. The reason being, they know that a lot of especially black men, come from tougher neighborhoods where you had to keep your back against the wall and your fist in the air in order to survive. And they can say that, okay, you have a history of being combative, of being aggressive, and could also use that as a technique to not hire you. These were deliberate questions that were asked of black applicants. And like I said, don't take my word for it. Ask around. Bring some of those people on your shows or what have you, on your YouTubes or what have you. But know that I am speaking from personal experience and from what I know from other officers as well. So there was a certain way that you had to answer questions. So it's the approach to the strategy and approach to disqualify black applicants from police departments is multi-layered, and they're going to catch you at some point of the process. So you're basically playing an evasion game in order just to get on. And when you get on, the fight truly happens because they don't believe that you deserve to be there, as evidenced further by this video. Will cops form marauder gangs after SHTF and Insider's View? So I'm not one of the people that like to support trash content by viewing it, but feel free. I believe that I gave you as detailed of a synopsis of it as possible, but I just wanted to correct a lot of the bad information and give something that was accurate in order to just not allow this stuff to sway people's minds, because the internet, like anything that's able to communicate with masses of people, can be very, very dangerous, and the information that people receive can be very, very hurtful. And one of the things that I hope to do in the life that the Most High has given me is to defeat that, I'll call it a racist genome that is passed on and on throughout generation to generation. And this video is one that I would consider one that actually supports it. It supports that continued passing on of that racist ideology. And I, for one, am against it. But this is my reply and rebuttal. I basically just want people educated. I want people to make the right decisions, and I want people to be safe. I want people to be brotherly and sisterly, living amongst each other in peace. And it's something that can happen, and you can be the one that affected. Always train to protect yourselves, your loved ones, and others. Always do right. Be of the highest level of integrity, unquestionable by anyone. Make the right decisions, because you know what's right, and you can do it, and you will do it. Those of you who have considered the thought of law enforcement, especially those of you who do not see yourself being a law enforcement officer, I was that person. You'll probably make the best one ever. You will probably be a legend in your department. My initial department I've been gone from for a while, and people still talk about and ask of me till this very day. So I know that I have left a legacy, and I'm sure that you can too. So consider the pursuit of a law enforcement career. More good men and women, especially people of color, are needed. And when I say people of color, I mean people of color, not just black folks. People of color are needed. Our Hispanic brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters. You need to consider it. We need diversity. Without diversity, we get guys with the half of mouth covering goatees, spewing idiotic nonsense. That's a double negative on YouTube. So consider it. keep yourself and keep your loved ones safe. Do right by all. And I look forward to speaking with you all again soon. Thanks.